May 10, 2025, Eastern Ukraine. At dawn, the quiet village of Dresba awoke not to birdsong, but to war. Russian armored columns, tanks, and elite assault teams surged into the settlement in a massive, coordinated strike. Their orders were unmistakable: crush the Ukrainian front with one overwhelming blow. Their numbers promised victory. Their confidence was absolute. What they didn't know was that every move they made was being watched, tracked, logged, predicted, and waiting in silence. The Ukrainians held American-made weapons. 17 kilometers from the front line, hidden beneath netting in a shallow ravine, a lone M109A6 Paladin stirred to life. Supported overhead by a circling reconnaissance drone, it wasn't simply reacting to the battlefield, it was anticipating it. When it fired, it struck with surgical precision, tearing into the Russian advance before they even realized they were under attack. What followed was not a conventional battle. It was a demonstration modern warfare at its most lethal. How could just 3 soldiers and a single howitzer break an entire mechanized assault in less than an hour? Follow the story. The answer is chilling. The storm breaks. The morning fog clung thick over the wheat fields of eastern Ukraine. Dresba, once nothing more than a checkpoint on a forgotten road, shuddered awake as the earth shook beneath approaching engines. The first to appear were T-72 tanks, steel leviathans crawling forward with guttural growls. Behind them rolled BMP infantry fighting vehicles, their turrets swiveling, while Russian storm units' elite assault troops moved on foot in staggered formation. This was no probing skirmish, it was a full-scale ground assault, orchestrated down to the second. The Russian plan was textbook: overwhelm the defenders with armor, shock, and firepower before they could organize. A combined arms hammer blow. Machine guns barked 12, 7mm heavy weapons mounted on BMPs and 30mm autocannons spat streams of fire. Trenches were blanketed in steel, soil erupting in showers of mud and shrapnel. Pinned inside those trenches was Ukraine's 93rd Mechanized Brigade. They fought back with PKM machine guns, RPGs, and grit, but the imbalance was brutal. Each Ukrainian shot was answered by a storm of Russian fire. Every meter of ground became a death trap. Without artillery support, the line would collapse. By 6:14 a.m., Russian tanks had already crossed abandoned farmland. Their advance wasn't narrow, like a spear thrust, it was broad, deliberate, a heavy boot pressing down across the sector. The intent was clear, not just to break through, but to encircle, to crush Ukraine's front and sever the battlefield in two. Commanders on the Ukrainian side understood immediately if reinforcements didn't arrive within minutes, those men in the trenches would be cut off, surrounded, and lost. In most wars of the past, this is where sheer numbers decided everything. The side with more steel and more men would inevitably grind down the other. But this war was different. Modern warfare does not bow to numbers alone. It answers to speed, data, and precision. Ukraine had something Russia hadn't anticipated. The Paladin awakens 17 kilometers behind the chaos, hidden under camouflage and brush, rested an M109A6 Paladin self-propelled howitzer. It wasn't designed to duel tanks head-on, it was designed to annihilate them from afar. Its reach stretched far beyond the front line. Its 155mm cannon could strike targets invisible to the naked eye with near-pinpoint accuracy. But its true strength was not just its firepower, it was the machine's brain. The Paladin's automated fire control system turned battlefield chaos into calculable data. When Ukrainian spotters or drones fed it coordinates, the onboard computer calculated everything in seconds: wind speed, barrel temperature, elevation, humidity, even air density. Where Soviet-era artillery might take 5 minutes to line up a shot, the Paladin needed less than 30 seconds. That speed meant it could fire on moving targets, Russian BMPs still advancing, not yet dug in before they had time to change formation, and when it fired, it didn't linger. The Paladin used shoot-and-scoot tactics, unleash a devastating volley, then immediately reposition before Russian counter-battery radars could triangulate. The result? constant firepower with near-zero exposure. Back in the trenches, Ukrainian soldiers didn't yet know what weapon had been unleashed to save them. All they heard was a distant thunderclap, then another, then 6 more booms echoing across the hills, and then, to their astonishment, Russian tanks began to burn. Fire and steel the Russian advance, so confident just minutes before, faltered. Each kilometer gained now came at a terrible price. BMPs burst into flames as precision shells detonated above them, raining submunitions that tore through armor. Tanks rolled forward only to halt, crippled, their turrets blown skyward. The Ukrainian infantry, moments from collapse, now felt the shift. The ground still shook, but now it was Russian steel being ripped apart, hidden beneath its netting. The Paladin kept firing, the crew working like clockwork. Load, calculate, fire, move again and again, each strike guided by real-time drone intelligence. What the Russians had expected to be a swift hammer blow turned into a killing field. Instead of a decisive breakthrough, their columns were shattered, bleeding men and machines at every step, and it all came from 3 soldiers and a single howitzer. From the forward command post, the battlefield looked deceptively quiet. Yet unlike traditional artillery systems of the past where crews manually compensated for wind, barrel wear, and target movement, the M109 Paladin was operating in an entirely different league. Every calculation, every adjustment was performed. Digitally, its Advanced Fire Control System (FCS) continuously absorbed target data through encrypted communications. Within seconds, the onboard computer processed an array of variables: distance to target, precise GPS coordinates, terrain elevation, atmospheric pressure, humidity, wind direction, and even the Coriolis effect, the subtle influence of Earth's rotation on long-range trajectories. These weren't theoretical considerations. They were live, integrated corrections, applied in real time to guarantee accuracy on the very first shot. Then the silence was broken with a thunderous roar. A 155mm shell tore upward into the sky. Another followed, then another. Each round wasn't just lobbed into a vague grid reference. Each was aimed at a specific point of destruction. Scientific precision guided the Paladin's fire, its first strikes targeting the lead Russian BMP infantry vehicles that had just emerged from the southern tree line near Sector Echo. Within moments, the first Russian vehicle erupted into a fireball, flames punching through steel as black smoke clawed into the air. Confusion rippled through the advancing column. The enemy hadn't yet identified where the blows were coming from. A second shell detonated just behind their formation, the shockwave violent enough to lift the armored tracks of nearby vehicles. This wasn't indiscriminate bombardment, it was surgical annihilation. Precision, however, was only one side of the Paladin's advantage. It could sustain up to 4 rounds per minute, and after delivering its deadly payload, reposition almost immediately. This shoot and scoot tactic was not merely clever, it was survival. Russian counter-battery systems, such as the Zupark-1 radar, could triangulate the origin of incoming fire in as little as 60 to 90 seconds. Yet by the time that window closed, the Paladin was already gone, rolling across the landscape. In this engagement, the doctrine played out flawlessly. After firing 8 rounds, the Paladin commander issued the order, relocate. Instantly, the vehicle's navigation suite charted a new route through uneven terrain, bypassing open fields where hostile drones might catch sight of them. The 27-ton machine rumbled away at 38 kilometers per hour, not fast by automotive standards, but on a battlefield it was speedy enough to cheat death. Even as the Paladin repositioned, its last shells were still in flight. To BMPs lay crippled. A T-7 to tank sat immobilized, one track shredded by a near miss. More importantly, the entire Russian formation had stalled. What began as a bold mechanized thrust was unraveling into chaos, and the Ukrainian guns had achieved it from 17 kilometers away with a machine that didn't simply fire, it calculated, it maneuvered, and it out-hot its enemy. But artillery alone doesn't guarantee dominance. Could a flying machine truly guide firepower with near-perfect precision in the fog of war? The answer revealed itself above the battlefield. As smoke drifted over the shattered wrecks of Russian armor, the Phoenix drone hovered silently at 750 meters. Invisible to the naked eye, it remained low enough to capture real-time data yet high enough to avoid detection. Phoenix was no ordinary UAV outfitted with electro-optical sensors, infrared cameras, and thermal imagers mounted on a stabilized gimbal. It maintained a steady lock on moving targets even through fog, rain, and battlefield smoke. But Phoenix didn't just see, it interpreted. Its onboard AI-driven targeting suite analyzed the battle space continuously, classifying vehicles, identifying fuel trucks, flagging command posts, and distinguishing between tanks, APCs, and decoys. It prioritized threats by danger level, ensuring that critical targets such as a T-70 to swinging its turret toward Ukrainian trenches were highlighted within seconds. Every 7 seconds, Phoenix transmitted updated coordinates, velocity, and heading back to the Ukrainian command network. From there, the data traveled through hardened, encrypted channels designed to resist Russian jamming attempts, arriving seamlessly at the Paladin's fire control system. This closed the so-called sensor two-shooter loop in under 45 seconds. Traditionally, artillery relied on static grid coordinates, map references, or delayed spotter reports. But with Phoenix in the loop, the Paladin didn't fire at where the enemy had been, it fired at where the enemy was going. On May 10th, this precision mattered more than ever. Russian units weren't static, they were charging at nearly 60 kilometers per hour, attempting to flank Ukrainian defenses. Yet the Paladin, aided by Phoenix's relentless stream of intelligence, dropped shells within meters of fast-moving armor. One engagement proved decisive. Phoenix identified a T-70 to tank with its gun already trained toward the forward trench line. Its engine heat signature glowed vividly in thermal view. The AI flagged it as Priority 1 within seconds. The fire mission was executed, coordinates sent, gun adjusted, and a high explosive round screamed across the sky. The tank never fired its shot. Phoenix's role extended beyond destruction. It served as guardian, with Ukrainian infantry often fighting. Within just 80 meters of Russian armor, the risk of friendly fire was immense. Without Phoenix's thermal overlays and precision target marking, even accurate artillery fire could turn catastrophic. Instead, thanks to the drone's clarity, not a single Ukrainian unit was struck during the Paladin's engagements in this war. Drones were no longer mere spotters, they had become indispensable partners. They saw beyond human eyes, processed beyond human speed, and delivered certainty where once there was guesswork. Faster than any officer could have responded, and when paired with advanced artillery like the M109 Paladin, Ukraine's firepower shifted from merely reacting to Russian movements to striking preemptively. That morning, the overdressed Phoenix drone wasn't just an observer in the sky, it became the conductor of the battle. The battlefield was shifting by the minute. Russian tanks, shaken from the initial blow, began to regroup. Infantry fire teams advanced in short, staggered bursts, trying to claw back a foothold beyond the wreckage of burning BMPs. Ukrainian commanders understood the reality. A temporary pause in Russia's advance wasn't victory. To truly blunt the assault, pressure alone wouldn't suffice. They needed shock, a sudden, overwhelming force that would break the enemy's will. That's when the Paladin entered the fight. From its newly repositioned site, tucked deep within a wooded depression south of their Gel line, the Paladin prepared to unleash a tactic so advanced that many artillery crews around the world had only ever practiced it in simulation. It was called MRSI, multiple rounds, simultaneous impact. Traditional artillery fire sends shells along similar arcs, landing seconds apart. Devastating, but predictable, MRSI changed everything. By varying both elevation angle and propellant charge, the Paladin could fire as many as 6 shells, each on a unique trajectory, all converging on the same target within a 2-second window. It wasn't simply a bombardment, it was an orchestrated ambush from the sky. Here's how it played out. The Paladin's fire control computer performed over 130 calculations for every shot, accounting for ballistics, barrel wear, weather conditions, the temperature of the powder, even the minor drift caused by Earth's rotation. It was battlefield mathematics at its most precise, performed under the weight of combat, by soldiers trained to make seconds count. The target, a tightly packed Russian armored column pushing on Ukraine's eastern flank. BMP infantry carriers led the line, while T-70 tanks lumbered behind them. The Paladin gunner locked the MRSI sequence and gave the signal. A deep metallic thud cracked through the valley, then again and again. 6 shots in rapid succession, each shell disappearing into the clouds along its own path. Moments later, the sky opened, 6 detonations thundered almost as one, overlapping before the echoes of the first had even faded. The effect was catastrophic. TBMPs were obliterated, their armor ripped apart by high explosive fragmentation, a T-70 to ground to a halt, one track severed by a direct strike. The armor formation crumbled in an instant, some vehicles reversing frantically, others stalling altogether. Ukrainian infantry, listening from their trenches, could hear the chaos unraveling, shouting, engines straining, then silence. But the most devastating blow wasn't the destroyed vehicles. It was psychological. Russian troops had no time to react, no chance to adapt. To them, it was as if the hillside itself had erupted, swallowing their advance whole. Panic spread faster than shrapnel. Through scopes and periscopes, Ukrainian soldiers witnessed something rare. Russian units retreating in disarray, without orders, stumbling backward toward cover. And the astonishing truth? All of it had come from a single Paladin. In earlier wars, such an effect required coordinated batteries, multiple guns, multiple positions, complex timing. Here, one advanced howitzer had replicated the destructive power of a dozen weapons. In less than 60 seconds, the momentum of the battlefield shifted. And the Paladin wasn't finished, as Russian armor faltered under the crushing weight of the MRSI strike. Their infantry began to scatter. Without armored protection, they broke into small units, weaving through the tall wheat fields east of Dresba. Some frantically dug into the soil, others scrambled to establish machine gun nests. A few tried to press forward on foot, desperate for momentum. For a moment, it seemed possible they might regroup and launch a wave of close-quarters attacks. But the Paladin crew saw the situation differently. Tanks were no longer the priority. Now the mission was denial, turning open ground into a death trap. That meant switching to a very different kind of ammunition. Within a minute, the Paladin had reloaded, this time not with high explosive shells or precision-guided rounds, but with M483A1 DPICM dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, more commonly known as cluster shells. Each one carried 88 submunitions, small bomblets the size of baseballs, each designed to explode independently as they descended. This wasn't indiscriminate area fire. The Paladin's automated control system calculated the exact altitude and spread required. The crew set the burst height at 50 meters, optimal for saturating the wheat field with maximum effect. A single DPICM shell could blanket a 30-meter radius. The Paladin prepared to launch several in sequence. Older systems would have required separate vehicles to switch ammunition types in battle, but the Paladin's modular loader, the digital targeting system, allowed the transition instantly. The first cluster shell roared into the sky mid-flight. It broke open like a steel flower, scattering its submunitions in a precise, lethal pattern. Seconds later, the wheat fields lit up like a storm. Hundreds of explosions rippled across the ground. M40 and M46 submunitions combining armor-piercing cones with fragmentation charges. The Phoenix drone, still hovering above, captured the aftermath through thermal imaging. The screen lit up with dozens of new heat blooms, the infrared signature of enemy soldiers caught in the storm. Hit or killed, the words flared across the battlefield display like a grim tally of destruction. One Russian BMP caught squarely beneath a cluster of descending bomblets. shuddered violently as multiple top-down impacts ripped into its armor. Flames burst from its turret, and its crew scrambled desperately into the brush, abandoning the vehicle that had become a death trap. But there was nowhere to run. Russian infantry, caught mid-movement in the open fields, had no cover and no time to react. Their formations were shredded in seconds, the men torn apart before they could even scatter. Screams echoed across the wheat fields, carried on the wind a haunting reminder of how sudden and merciless the strike had been. There had been no warning, no mortar whistles, no rolling artillery barrage, no gradual crescendo of fire. Only silence, and then, in an instant, fragmentation rained down. Traditional artillery would have needed 8 to 10 heavy shells to achieve the same blanket of destruction. That method would have taken time, given the enemy precious minutes to dive for cover or reposition, but the DPICM strike was different. It was sudden, it was surgical, it was total. In that single moment, Ukraine didn't need more guns or more shells, they simply needed the right weapon at precisely the right time. The Paladin didn't just destroy enemy troops, it denied them the very ground they stood on. By making the field impassable, it granted Ukrainian infantry breathing space, stripping away the threat of a sudden bayonet charge or a hidden machine gun ambush. It was not only about firepower, it was about control, and in seizing that control, the Paladin proved a timeless truth, one that would echo across every gun position that day. Adaptability wins battles. The battle for Dresba was reaching its final hour. Smoke curled upwards from twisted steel husks, blending with the haze of dust and cordite. The once golden wheat fields, unbroken and swaying only that morning, were cratered, blackened, and scarred. Russian infantry had either withdrawn in disorder or laid down their weapons in surrender. Their armored spearhead, once the pride of the assault, had been reduced to little more than smoldering wreckage. Yet for the men of Ukraine's 93rd Mechanized Brigade, victory had not come cheaply. Dug into shallow trenches, rifles clutched tight, nerves stretched thin, they had endured every moment of uncertainty. They had not been saved by luck, nor by chance. They had been saved by careful calculation, by disciplined coordination, and above all by people. At the heart of that salvation stood the M109A6 Paladin. The gun had performed without error, executing every fire mission with lethal precision. In just 51 minutes, the system had fired 22 high-explosive rounds, 8 GPS-guided Excalibur shells, and for DPICM salvos, what once would have required a full battery of artillery had been achieved with a single gun. But it would be wrong to imagine that the Paladin fought alone. Every shell, every precise impact, began with a human decision. Inside the armored hull, a 3-man crew operated under constant pressure. The gunner trusted the advanced fire control system, the turning point at Dresba targeting computer, but still verified every coordinate before firing. The commander, headset pressed tight, interpreted a flood of updates from Phoenix drones and ground spotters, making life or death calls on which targets mattered most. And the driver, often with only seconds to spare, maneuvered the 27-ton machine across torn ground, avoiding Russian counter-battery fire that sought to silence them. Above them circled the Phoenix drone, not autonomous, not mindless, but guided by a trained operator seated miles away. That operator sifted through sensor feeds, identified heat signatures, and decided when the AI was wrong and when it was exactly right. Behind the lines, fire control officers and analysts pieced together a living map of the battlefield, stitching together drone intelligence, radio reports, and satellite imagery into a coherent picture. It was this invisible network of human choices that allowed the Paladin's shells to land not just quickly, but correctly. Modern warfare dazzles outsiders with its machinery, autonomous drones, smart shells, howitzers that calculate ballistics in fractions of a second. Yet none of it matters if the people behind those systems hesitate, misinterpret, or fail to adapt. At Dresba, firepower alone didn't win. What won was speed of thought, clarity under chaos, and the will to hold the line when everything seems stacked against them. An Excalibur shell may cost $112,000, but in untrained hands it is worthless. In the hands of a skilled crew, it becomes the line between survival and collapse. The Paladin may have struck the blows, the Phoenix may have seen every movement, and encrypted data links may have carried information like lightning. But the true victory belonged to the men and women who made the system work when it mattered most. Because in the end, wars are not won by machines. Wars are won by people. The Battle of Dresba was not just a tactical win. It was a turning point in the philosophy of modern conflict. In less than an hour, one American-built howitzer,